The first question is just tell me when you were born and where you were born.
Was born April the 27th, 1905, in Springfield, Kentucky, about 5 miles out of Springfield on Willisburg Road.
Were you was that in the hospital or was that at home?
In those days, mothers did not go to the hospital. It was at home.
Oh, okay. You told me the other day that your mother, how old was your mother when you were born?
She must have been close to 20.
Okay. Um, can you tell me a little bit about your parents? Just
Well,
their names and what they did.
my father's name was Daniel Alton Kelly. The second son of John and Lula Kelly. And my mother was Lyra Reed. Her mother died when she was less than 3 years old, and she lived with an aunt and didn't have any sisters or brothers.
Oh. Now where'd you grow up at? Is that outside Springfield?
Well, where my mother came from was a small town that they called Poor Town, P-O-O-R, Poor Town.
And is that where you grew up? Or that's where your mother grew
No,
up?
my address was Springfield.
Oh, okay. Okay, you've told me, I want to ask you some things about life on the farm for you then, because I think a lot of things have changed since the early 1900s, and I think it's interesting, how you did things differently. Um, um, what about, when did you first get electricity? Did you?
Honey, I was married in Louisville before I ever had electricity.
Mm-hmm. So you all did things with what kind of lighting? Like what'd you have in the evening?
The lights?
Yeah.
Coal oil lamps.
I've always wanted to know this. Did you stay up not as late as people do now because of those lamps? Did you go to bed earlier? Or?
I have read by a coal oil lamp, but it wasn't a very easy job. They didn't. Did you ever see one burning?
No, I don't think so.
Well, I'll light one for you the next time you come to my house and let you read by it.
Didn't work too well.
It wasn't very much fun, but we got by.
Yeah, but really, do you think people went to bed earlier all the time because of the lighting in the evening? I mean, was it not as or not?
Repeat that.
Did you stay up late at night the way people do now? Because
no, country people did not stay up late.
Yeah.
The farmers got up too early to go to work, and everybody went to bed at dark.
Oh, okay. Well, I kind of thought that. Now, so you didn't have refrigeration.
No.
So how in the world did you keep your food?
Well, people have kept it from noon to night, and that would be all right, but it wouldn't be very easy to keep it any longer.
Yeah.
And I have seen people make some kind of a chain or a rope and hang something down in a well for a little bit down in the well to keep it cool, because that would be cooler than on the back porch in the sun.
That's a good idea. And you told me once people didn't eat beef on the farm, that you didn't ever eat beef.
No, you did not have beef because there was no way to cure beef for farmers. And now in the fall, a farmer would kill a beef and they would divide it up among a group so they could use it before it spoiled. And then another farmer, and that's the only time that we had beef in my day.
And so you told me you ate pork more often.
Well, pork, because the pork could be cured.
Mm-hmm.
Or
and I
frying chickens only during the time that they were at the point of being frying chickens. When they grew to be, you didn't have them during the winter. They were hatched in the summer. And then by fall, about late fall, you didn't have frying chickens, you had a hen. Or turkey. Or some people had geese and some people had ducks.
Some people had what? I'm sorry.
Some people had ducks and some had geese that they would kill at times for food. And turkeys.
Yeah. Oh. Okay, let's see. I suppose you must have had to can everything or
Yes.
everything else would have to be.
You canned during the summer all kind of vegetables, made jellies and jams, pickles,
Mhm.
tomato relish and all that.
Okay. Can you stop?
System in our neighborhood, and that belonged to our friend the Clemens, and they had one, but no one else that I knew had one.
What's a Delco? What's a Delco law?
Delco system.
What was it?
Well, it contained, you see, nobody else can use it. It's just right a motor right in your own shed you build outside or something,
For electricity?
and that some kind of a motor that runs the light system.
Basically
I don't know
your
a
own
thing
generator.
about it. Only I just know that they had electric lights.
When did those come along?
It was when I was still at home.
Okay.
I would say possibly I was 15 before they had it.
How many brothers? I'm sorry. What were you gonna say? I was gonna change the subject. I was gonna change the subject.
Oh.
I'm sorry. How many brothers and sisters do you have? And can you tell me a little bit about them?
I had 4 sisters and 4 sisters and 3 brothers.
Yeah. Okay. And how are you? You're the oldest.
I'm the oldest. Two sisters.
What's their name? Just give me their names.
2 sisters, Ione and Mayola.
Uh-huh.
Then my brother Alton, who was killed in World War II. My brother James. Then Maddie, Lyra, and Bill was the youngest.
And where did you go to school?
A small one-room country school called Science Hall, about 3 miles up the road from my house.
And you went from up until how old?
Possibly late July until about January.
Oh, really late July? And then you were out of school?
No, we started in late July
Yeah.
and went about through January.
And then you were off from January till
Yes.
July. Why were you off then?
Well, that's only the longest school, and that's as long as they had the country schools in those days.
Oh, isn't that funny? Huh. I didn't know you were on a different school schedule than they have now. I didn't know that you were on a different school schedule than they
Oh
have
yes,
now.
the country school schedules were different in those days from what they are now. They do not have those kind of schools now. They have consolidated, or they go to a small town to a different type school.
How many kids were in your country school? How many would be in it? How many kids would be in your class?
Well, in my class, there was 1 boy and 3 other girls, and that was it. At least when I got out of school. I don't know when I first started.
Yeah. And how old were you when you got out of that country school? I mean, how many years did you go
Well,
to school?
I did not start the school until I guess, would have been going into the 3rd grade because I would have had too far to walk and I could not walk alone. And they waited till my sister was old enough to go with me, but my mother taught me at home and I started in the 3rd grade.
Oh.
And I got out of school at the same time any other child gets out of grade school at 14.
Okay. Then did you go to high school?
High school.
Now where is that at?
High school was in Springfield, and that was the regular school hours. It wasn't in school year. I mean, it was a longer year, but normal high school year.
Okay.
And I graduated at 18.
So what year was that? What year did you graduate?
23.
Okay.
23.
And then you went.
And then I went 1 year to what in those days they call normal school, and after that 1 year you got a teacher's certificate. And I went to St. Catherine's that year.
Did you like school? Did you like your school? Did you have
Yes,
fun
I
in
think I
school?
did.
Okay.
I never remember complaining.
Okay. I want to ask what your impressions were of some things that were going on, you know, historical things. Like, do you have any recollections about World War I? Did it affect
About
you?
what?
World War I, did it affect you in any way?
No, I don't think it did, because I didn't have any relatives in it, no family. I don't think and we didn't get papers, or you didn't have TV, you didn't have radios, you really didn't know.
What about, like the Roaring Twenties? Did you think it was kind of wild then, or not? Now
Well, I guess it was in some cases, but not for me.
Yeah. So, when did you get married?
November.
You don't have to tell me the exact date, just what year.
November 25. I
Okay.
better not say the date.
And, how did you meet Grandpa?
When I was teaching.
Yeah.
I think he came over the hill to see the teacher.
So he lived close to the school then, huh?
Yeah, not, he had a little distance, mile or so, but you couldn't see the school from his house.
Yeah. And you didn't teach after you were married, did you? So
They don't let you.
They didn't let you.
They let you
Sure.
finish what you were doing that year, but then after that, well, of course, I couldn't have taught for 2 years because I only had a 2-year certificate. I'd had to go back to school, but they wouldn't let you teach anyway.
And then what did you do after you were married? Didn't you moved shortly after you were married, didn't you?
After we were married, we stayed out there around his farm for a couple of years, and then we went to Chicago and lived
And why did you go to Chicago?
lived 6 months in Chicago.
Why did you move to Chicago?
Why?
Uh-huh.
His sister and her husband were there and told him they had a job for him, so we went there.
Oh, okay. Were a lot of people moving off the farms at that time? Do you
Yes.
think that was a big
The
move?
young people.
Yeah. And so you,
What year
what year did they go to Chicago?
would this been? Yeah.
What year did you go to Chicago? Do you remember?
We went to Chicago in 1927.
What did you think of Chicago?
Jimmy was born in June, and we went there in September, I think.
You weren't there very long, but what did you think
We
of?
stayed until the following April,
Yeah.
and then we came back to Louisville.
Were you glad to come back to Louisville?
Yes, I was glad to come back to Kentucky. No, I was glad after he did find a job in Kentucky. I didn't want to come back, but then after we got back and he had a job, I was glad.
So you were just worried about the job situation? You were worried about the job situation?
Yes.
Yeah. And, let's see, now where did he start working then when he got back to Louisville?
Diane, don't ask
Don't
me.
know.
It was one of those factories
Well-
that's been closed 40 years.
Well, I guess my point, reason I'm asking is, I know you both worked at National Distillers,
Yes,
but
but
when
that-
did you start there?
We started at National Distillers. The cart started in, I would say, early fall 1933, and I went to work in February 1934.
Okay.
But my work was not regular.
Oh, okay. How did you work then? You worked part-time?
Part-time then, because they would have rushes and call in people and then lay them off. And I went to work regular in 41.
Okay.
And from that until 69, regular.
So you were having your kids along through this time. Tell me the names of your kids and when they were born.
The first one when he was born,
Yeah, I guess you said that.
James, 19 and June the 9th, 1927.
Okay. And then?
And Robert, March the 15th, 1929. And Norma, November the 14th, 1930. And Paul, October the 22nd, 1932.
Oh, okay.
Don't even know my kid's birthday.
Well, it's hard to recall that all. How did the Depression affect you?
Not good.
Tell me more about it. I want to know.
Can he hear me if I say something?
I think so. Do you want to shut it off? About how the Depression affected you?
Well, it was bad. We managed to keep our home because we had good credit, and the landlord was willing to let us pay him when we got the money, which we did eventually. And we had a very good grocery man who let us have credit, and we did pay him. But at times I didn't have very much to eat. I was lucky to have what we did have, and we always had food. I used to watch the buttermilk to keep the children from drinking it, so I'd have something to make bread with. And I remember one time my sister and I went to Haymarket to spend $1 or so, and we didn't realize what we were doing, but we had black beans and white beans and northern beans, and that's all we bought. So
that's what you ate.
but we came out of it and got all our debts paid and did very well after that.
How did you first get in trouble in the Depression? Did Grandpa lose a job, or what? Or
yes.
What happened?
Lost his job and no job to be had.
You couldn't get a job, for nothing.
No, but one entire summer he worked for the WPA and made $11 a week, and we paid every bill, including the gas and electric, and didn't have any gas, I guess, for summer, and the food and the rent.
For $11 a week, huh?
That's the fact.
What would you have considered? Well, that's a hard question. What would you have considered a normal wage at that time? Do you have any idea?
I have no idea.
Okay.
Diane, it wasn't much, because I went to work for National Distillers, and I made $12 a week.
Yeah.
And Clark made 16. And I only worked 2 weeks that time, so.
What was your first impression of new things, like, for instance, if you remember, like radio, when you first saw radio or first saw telephones? When did telephones first come in?
I have no idea when we first got a telephone. I cannot remember. I know we had one many, many years, but not during that real hard time.
Not during the 30s. And
but we did have a telephone when Bobby was born. But due to Clark's sister, who worked for the telephone company, and she got a discount, it was our phone, but we had one then. But then during that deep, dark depression, we did not have a phone. But, and radios, I don't even remember when we got the first one.
Was it fairly unusual for women to be working when you started working?
Well, women didn't work in those days like they did later, but there were a number of women at National Distillers when I went there.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't just a regular thing for women to do.
Because, well, and then I know women worked a lot during World War II. Women worked a lot during World War II.
Oh, yes.
Then it seemed, you think it got more conservative after World War II, where, you know, when I was growing up in the 50s, it just seemed like hardly no women worked. That's the way it seemed to me.
It seemed like what?
It seemed like very, very few women worked in the 50s to me.
Well,
do you think, well, you were working through all that
I was
time.
working through all of it, and none of the women I worked with quit.
Well,
But it wasn't as common as it is today for women to work.
do you remember women getting the vote? Didn't they get the vote in like 19? Do you remember women getting the vote, like in when they like 1920 or so? Don't remember.
I don't remember the year.
Yeah, I don't know when it was.
1919, I think.
But do you remember hearing? I mean, did it matter to you at that time? Did it matter to you at that time whether women got the vote?
No.
Vote or not? Yeah.
No.
Okay. Guess we're up to World War II. How did World War II affect you?
Well, it didn't bother my immediate family, but I had one brother killed in World War II,
Mm-hmm.
and a brother-in-law killed in World War II.
Oh, a brother-in-law too? I didn't realize that. Who was
Clark's
that?
brother.
Oh, yeah, Clark. Okay, Grandpa.
And another brother of his was in the war, and evidently the cancer he had, he developed while he was in the service, and he died in 1950.
Oh, didn't know that.
That was Tommy, Marguerite's husband.
Let's see.
And my son Jimmy was in World War II.
He was?
Yes, but
I
he
didn't
didn't.
know that.
He didn't go any further. He went up. He came up into Indiana. What part was that camp in Indiana?
Is it Benjamin Harrison
Between here
or
and
whatever?
Louisville, up near it.
Isn't there a Camp Benjamin Harrison? Isn't it a Camp Benjamin Harrison or something like that?
That wasn't that one.
That's not it.
It was another one. It was a place for. It built. Started during the World War II,
Mm-hmm.
and Jimmy was there the first 6 months he was in service. And the only thing he did not do any training or any. At that particular time, some of the soldiers were being released, and he was helping them to go through there when they were released.
That must have made you pretty nervous when he had to go
And
in.
I was worried to death he wouldn't be home for Christmas.
Oh.
He came home about 3 days a week. He'd hitchhike down the road and stay a while and go back home, go back to the camp.
Huh.
And he only worked. He worked at night and slept in the daytime, or came home. And then he went to Baltimore, and was up there 6 months, and then he was released from service.
Right.
And he did not work up there.
Do you remember?
I mean, so he did not train to be a soldier.
Okay. You must have been pretty worried about him having to be in the military at that, or was it right at the end of? I guess it was right at the end of the war. It was right at the end of the war when he was in.
When he came,
Was it right at the end of World War II then when he was in the military?
when he was retired,
No. Yeah.
he came out just about. The war was ending, but the peace hadn't been declared. But they were all coming home.
Do you remember what's it called? The last day? Is it VJ Day or something like that?
Yeah, BJ wanted.
What was it? What was that like? Do you remember being thrilled or not? Or
Oh yes.
oh yeah. What about? Let's see. What about the first cars? When did you first see a car? or do you remember, or what's your impression? I don't even know the date.
I can tell you the first new car
Yeah.
was in 1949,
Oh, really?
but that was the first new one. But we had a car most of the time only during the worst part of the Depression.
Oh, okay. But way back earlier when you, did they have cars? When did cars start? Cars were probably around when you were little.
Huh?
Did you ever see a car when you were a little kid? I mean, 5 or 10 years old?
Well, before I married, we had a car at our home.
Uh-huh.
But before that, my uncle was very ill at my grandmother's house, and the doctor drove a car by our house going to Grandma's, and he let us ride down with him and ride back.
Oh.
So
You saw those. This time in World War II and
well, from 1935 until 1968, I lived in the house where you visited me when you were a little one, and that's where Jimmy left home to go to the. We rented the house at first, and in '45 we bought it, and lived there until February 1968. We sold the house and moved.
You told me at one time that it was very hard to find a house. How did you find it?
Well, it wasn't hard to get the house when we got it, but the man put it for sale during the war, and there were no apartments, and you could not rent anything. Mm-hmm. And I was lucky enough to have the down payment on the house, so then we.
Oh, he put it up for sale right when you were living there.
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
Well, put it up, and it either had to be me or somebody else buy it.
Yeah.
And I was lucky enough to have the down payment, which wasn't very much. I think it was $1,000.
Wow. Let's see. And where was that you lived? Where was that house? I know.
3022 West Main Street.
Yeah. And we called you Grandma Choo Choo because you were right next to some railroad tracks.
We had the trains passing by.
Yeah, Grandma Choo Choo. But did you know my grandmother and grandfather, my mother's parents? They didn't live too far away.
I knew them, but not well.
I mean, did you ever know them before?
Not before, no.
Because I think they only lived 2 or 3 blocks away.
Yes, but it was too far to walk over. Yeah. It was more than 2 or 3.
Oh, was it?
I'd say 3 over and 2 or 3 up.
Okay. Let's see. I know there's one date that everybody remembers where they were, and I want to know where you were. Where were you when you heard that Kennedy got shot?
At National Distillers working.
Mhm. What I suppose what did you think, or what did you do as soon as you found that out? Did you all get off of work, or?
No, we did not. They didn't do things like that. We just worked right on till the end of the day.
They weren't too sentimental, were they?
I didn't like it, but you worked anyway.
Yeah. Where's the question? Okay, and when did you leave that house on Main Street?
February the 25th, 1968.
That's amazing. You remember the date of that?
I sure do.
I bet you wanted to move then.
Yes, I wanted to move.
And how did you find the apartment that you're in?
My brother Bill and his wife Hazel came down from Lebanon, and we looked around and found it. And then we rented it, and Hazel stayed down and helped me move and helped me buy curtains and shades and put them up for me. And my sister-in-law now, my brother and sister have been dead since 1972.
Let's see. So you still live in that same apartment. That's been a good place for you to live, hasn't it? Because that's been a good place for you to live because of your friends there and everything.
I've had a good time there.
Yeah.
It's not the best, but it's pretty good.
Um, what are some of the big ways that things have changed since you were small? I know we've talked about the, you go ahead and talk about the
Since
crime. Since you were a kid, I mean, how's the world changed?
well, there's so much more crime now as the years went on, especially when my children were growing up and my sister-in-law lived with me. We never locked the doors till they all came in. I don't think they got locked when they came in. My sister-in-law walked 2 blocks in the dark down an alley and in my house and never was bothered by anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And as you know, and we know, all of us, that you can't go out your door now without being in danger.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so much more robbery. There's so much more, all kind of crime.
Mm-hmm. Do you think all of the changes, I mean, does life seem a lot easier to you now than it did, say, living on the farm with all the conveniences now?
Yes, life is easier for me.
Yeah.
Very much easier.
Yeah. I would think so. But sometimes I wonder how I would deal with it. I think that people probably had to be very careful to keep their clothes clean because they couldn't just throw them in the washer.
You did not have a washer. You had a wash tub and a board out in the backyard. And I assure you, you didn't change your clothes every day.
Yeah.
You were lucky once a week.
Well, did people take baths as often as they, do now? Would
No,
you say?
you didn't have anything but a wash pan. You didn't have a bathtub or running water. They washed their face, their hands. But no, it was impossible. No woman could have washed clothes that the kids today wash.
I don't think people even had as many clothes, did they?
They didn't have as many clothes.
Because I see the old wardrobes and stuff, and they're just these little bitty things,
You didn't have as many clothes. You wore them, and you always had to take off your school clothes when you walked in the house and put on your play clothes.
Mm-hmm. You try to keep your good clothes good.
And keep your good clothes for school or going out. You didn't go out. You went to church and school.
Do you think socializing, people did more socializing because I wonder how TV has changed the world. I have a theory that people socialize less because of TV, but do you think that's true or not?
Well, no, I don't. Not for me.
Yeah.
Because the TV never meant that much to me, but there was not much. There were parties. People had parties at home, but they didn't have them. They didn't go out on the town eating lunch out and going to movies and all that. They went to each other's house.
Mm-hmm. Would you say that people had, played cards more, did more things like that for entertainment?
Well, they had to.
Yeah.
You played cards more and went to each other's house, but you did not go to outside affairs. There was no way to go.
Yeah. Well, you used to use buses a lot in Louisville, didn't you?
Well, Louisville, not in Springfield.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, there was always trolley cars.
We're skipping around in time here, but so they had trolley cars. I wonder why those trolleys went away. They'd probably give anything to have them now. I wonder why everybody got a car and they just quit using them.
No, everybody got, the buses came in.
Oh.
There were still a lot of buses
Yeah.
in Louisville.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people ride buses.
Yeah.
But it was very necessary in my day. Of course, we had a car. The complete time we worked, we had a car.
Yeah. About your ancestry, can you tell? You know something about the first Kelly ancestor that came over?
Well, my great-grandfather and his wife were coming from Ireland to the United States, and my great-grandfather suicide that it was his children that died, John's?
I think, yeah, I know you were
John,
talking about that.
Daniel's brothers, a number of them died of cholera and were buried in St. Rose. And Daniel was about the only one of any of the children who had children, and that most of the Kellys came from Daniel, of that Kelly family.
That's your great-great-grandfather? Your great
That was my great-grandfather.
Okay, what about your grandfather? Who was that? What's your
My
grandfather?
grandfather was Daniel's son, John Kelly. There were 4 sons and 2 daughters.
Tell me just a little bit about your grandparents. You know, your other grandparents. Your other grandparents. Did you know all of your grandparents?
No, I never saw my grandfather John Kelly, and he was died the year before I was born. And my mother's mother died when my mother was 3 years old.
Oh yeah.
I saw my grandpa Reed and my grandma Kelly.
We were looking at that picture the other night and realized that your grandfather was something like 23 years older than your grandma
Something
Kelly.
like that.
It was quite a bit older. So,
My grandmother Kelly was also didn't have a mother. Her mother died, and she lived with an aunt.
how did your parents get the farm that you lived on? Did they buy it or inherit it, or?
My mother inherited money from her mother's estate when she was a certain age, and she put that money on the first farm.
Oh.
Wait a minute. My great-great-grandfather John came over from Ireland on the ship. On the way over, his son Dan was born. When Dan grew up and married...
Dan was your grandfather?
Dan was my great-grandfather.
Great-grandfather, okay.
And when he grew up and got married, he had a son, John, who was my grandfather. And my grandfather had 5 sons. One was named John, and one was named Dan. The other 3 were not named for the ancestors.
And Dan was then your father?
Dan was my father.
Okay.
Are all of your ancestry Irish? Are you all Irish? Do you know?
Mom always said we were Scotch-Irish.
Yeah.
There's some Irish, Kelly the Irish. But she said it was Scotch someplace.
What's your mother's maiden name?
Reed.
I don't know. Maybe that's Scotch. I don't know.
And her mother's name was Litzy.
Can you tell me something about the Corbett side of the family? My grandpa Corbett's family, and how many brothers and sisters did he have, and what were their names, and what happened to
Turned
them?
off like it did.
Grandpa Corbett's family, his brothers and sisters, and what happened?
I will
to them?
list their names according to their age. Will, should I say he died in 1965?
Sure, go ahead.
Right now?
Yeah.
Will, who died in 1965, I do not know the cause. Richard, who died in 1973, he had emphysema. Lucille, I do not know the cause of death. Clark, 1973, my husband, who had an operation for lung cancer, but he eventually died from blood clots before coming home. Frank fell dead due to a heart attack. He was never married. Bert, who married Eddie Tillo, and she died sometime in the 70s. I cannot remember. I do not know the cause of death. Josephine, who died in the 70s, she had married a Rudy. She'd been divorced a number of years, and she had cancer. Tommy married Marguerite Ballard. He died at age 50 from operation due to a brain tumor that started during his World War II service. Teresa, who is the sister of Loretta in Monrovia, California, and C.W., who was injured in World War II and died on board ship and was buried at sea on the way home to the United States. Is that it?
That's it. All day for you right now.
Well, unless it's very necessary, I get up when I wake up. And it doesn't take me long to get to the kitchen to get my paper and my cup of coffee. And I start working the crossword puzzle, and I'm very involved for a couple of hours. And then I do what little work I have to do, make my bed, eat a little bite of breakfast, get my bath and get ready to go out, which we have lunch out every day. And then after spending a few hours out, I'm back home. And then I may go down and do a load of wash or read my book or work some more puzzles that my son Paul sent me. And then I manage to get in bed around 10:30, 11 o'clock. That's it. And that's almost every day.
You always have a book going.
Yes, I always have a book going, and plenty there on the stand to pick up when I finish one.
You read romance stories, don't you?
Hmm?
You read romance stories mostly, don't you?
Oh, I read Danielle Steele and Barbara Taylor Bradford and such as that.
Yeah. Okay, well, thanks a lot. We're going to wrap up this session. I said we're going to wrap up this session.
Gonna wrap up this session.
Okay.
Okay.